Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of CMC. I want to welcome you today. Great turnout, beautiful weather, at least it's not snowing right now, right? Today's forum marks CMC's annual Harrison Bill Smith Legacy and Civic Engagement Forum, also sponsored by Smith & Hale, the Robert Weiler Company, and Crow and Horwath. All are represented here by many friends and associates. Would you please help me thank them? To save time, we'll get right to the program today, featuring the LeVeque Tower, a Columbus icon restored. Please welcome CEO of Kaufman Development, Brett Kaufman, Principal of Lawyers Development Group, Bob Meyers, Principal and Partner at Benjamin G. Rickey, Nancy Recchie, and from Katz Development, Kyle Katz. Nancy will start us off.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to give you a little bit of historic context about the building and why it's so significant in terms of the history and development of Columbus. I put together some slides. If you have phones, feel free to look at those. I'm not talking to them specifically, but I wanted to include some images for those of you who maybe don't know the city of Columbus when it was the only building on the skyline. And I think it speaks to how closely tied it is to the identity of this city and has been for so many years. I'd like to just give you a little bit of context about the city of Columbus in the 1920s. The city had a population in 1900 of 125,000 people. By 1920, that had nearly doubled to 237,000. So it was a huge period of growth and optimism for the city. Most of the development at the time was centered on Capitol Square. That's where City Hall was. That's where the major buildings were. High Street, Broad and High Street, the 100% corner of the city, was occupied by the Deschler Wallach Hotel. That's the site of where One Columbus is today. A fire burned Columbus City Hall, which was on the site of what is now the Ohio Theater, and attention started to shift to the idea that had been promoted for some time of developing a civic center along the riverfront. And it was really that opportunity. There were a convergence of different things that were happening, but downtown Columbus shifted significantly during this time period when civic development and the cleaning up of the riverfront began. And all you have to do is turn around to know that that location of the LeVeque Tower is so important because it became a riverfront feature, even though it wasn't really located right on the riverfront. The building that we know today very affectionately as the LeVeque Tower was built as the AIU Citadel. The AIU was the American Insurance Union. It was an insurance company basically of fraternal organizations. And the vision to build this building, to replace a 4-story building, was a pretty big jump and a pretty aspirational undertaking. John Lentz, who was the founder of the insurance company, was the moving force behind it. But they only needed a few stories. So to build a big building, it had to be a very smart real estate deal. And these guys sitting here up on the dais certainly know a lot about complicated real estate deals. And this one, the rebirth of it, was every bit as complicated as the early construction. But what was done was the area that we know of as the base of the building actually added rooms to the Deschler Wallach Hotel. It became a 1,000-room hotel, and I've heard Bob Leversige say this before, with 1,000 bathrooms. That was a very big deal at the time, to have a 1,000-room hotel and every single one had a bathroom. It was also designed in a very complicated way to allow for the construction of a major movie palace within the shell of the building. And again, that's something Bob and others could speak to, is that they're actually two separate structures. But if you look at it, it looks like the Palace Theater is actually part of it. The design of it also was groundbreaking. And when I was young, I used to think that the LeVeque Tower was the baby brother of the Empire State Building because of its telescoping design, its profile on the skyline. I'd like to tell you that the Empire State Building was completed 4 years after the LeVeque Tower. The LeVeque Tower was a groundbreaking building, not just for the city of Columbus. It was the period of time when skyscrapers went from what Henry James complained about in writing about New York. Tall buildings were just big rectangular buildings, small rectangular buildings that grew tall. It was the idea of light and air and creating a profile on a skyline that really changed. New York City started to change its zoning laws in 1916 and again in 1920 to really encourage that telescoping design, so you just didn't have a wall on the streetscape. This building was ahead of its time. Certainly for Ohio, it predates Terminal Tower in Cleveland. It was a very big deal when it was built, and it's still a very big deal to us. The design of the building, the exterior, that oak bark terracotta, which was beautifully restored and even new pieces created that you can't even tell where they were. The architect was C. Howard Crane, a very prominent architect from Detroit. The building was designed to be taller than the Washington Monument, and it's taller by 6 inches, a half a foot. So there were very intentional things that were built into the design. The building program at the time said, called for a building of outstanding beauty of line and design, ample room for expansion, and complete equipment for the needs of the American Insurance Union. What's interesting about that is the American Insurance Union, a lot of the symbolism in the building, both the exterior and interior, the sculptural groupings, the eagles, the angels, the horoscope of the building on the interior, all of those things were very much related to the American Insurance Union. There was only one problem with this project, and it was basically it bankrupted the company. It was completed in 1927. There is a fabulous reprint of the dedication booklet, and one of my favorite things about it, it has lots of flowery language, is great roots of concrete grope to bedrock, and called it the King of Buildings. So it's a great read, but it also gives you a sense of how important it was to the city. So it was the first skyscraper. It remained the tallest building in the city until the Rhodes Tower. It's been an icon in this city forever. It defines us. One of my favorite images of that was, it was an aviation beacon. And both the, I have a booklet here about the first transcontinental air route that has a photo of it as a beacon, but this wonderful dedication booklet said, "The Citadel is America's first aerial lighthouse, and beacons serve a twofold purpose. With a visibility of 80 or 90 miles from the sky, they're a guide for night-flying aviators who may shape their courses accordingly." This is the part I love. "Also, they hold forth a warning to airmen passing over the city that a mighty tower of unusual height governs the skyline." So the LeVeque Tower, the bankruptcy occurred. Part of that was due to the stock market crash and the Depression. John Lincoln and Leslie LeVeque purchased the building in 1945. That's when it was renamed the Lincoln LeVeque Tower. That's what it was called when I was growing up. The Deschler Hotel closed the annex in 1964. The Deschler Hotel was demolished in 1967. How many of you remember the observation deck that was at the top of the tower until the 1960s, when you can see the entire city of Columbus from the observation deck? Major changes occurred under the ownership of Catherine LeVeque. She did an enormous amount to make sure that that building was preserved until today. She renamed it the LeVeque Tower, renovated the Palace Theater, donated the Palace Theater to Kappa. After there were several changes of ownership in the early 2000s, some to out-of-state, out-of-town owners, and it really returned to local ownership, which was, I think, the key to what we're talking about today, the vision to make this building worthy of its history again. It always looked great from the exterior, but the interior had fallen on kind of hard times at that point. So I really just want to thank all of you for being involved in this renaissance of such a great building, such an important building on our skyline, and it still is the jewel of the skyline. No offense to anybody who's been involved with other things, but it will always define the city of Columbus.
Nancy, thank you so much. And by the way, I just finished 1927, Summer in America by Bill Bryson. If anyone's looking for a deeper dive into what's happening in America while this building's being built, it's a fabulous holiday read. Not a lot of pictures, I warn you, but it's a fabulous holiday read. To talk about the building, Bob, you were without question the primary driver of this renovation and this deal. Can you share how the deal came to fruition with us?
Thank you, Kyle. It actually was a very simple day that Wayne Hearer, whom many of you probably know, approached me and said that the owners of the LeVeque Tower, which was primarily Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company, was anticipating putting it on the market, and would I have an interest? And I took the initiative to go down and walk around and go in and so on, and saw that it was a facility that was quite worn. But I pursued a meeting with Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We met in Milwaukee to discuss this, and found them to be a tremendously impressive group, very, very supportive of this facility and the importance of this facility in the city of Columbus. And so over a course of 2 or 3 further meetings in Milwaukee, we ended up proposing a price that took into account the extensive restoration that was needed and the costs related thereto. And much to my surprise, they were very receptive to the amount. And as we talked through it, it was obvious to me they had the awareness that they could take this to the national market and realize a sale price probably 3 times greater than I had proposed. But again, and I say this with the highest degree of respect to the people there, that they appreciated that it needed to have a local development focus and a hands-on approach to this restoration. And so that's how the transaction moved forward. We acquired the property, and in that process, I had just recently finished another project with Don Casto and his partners. And actually, at this point in time, within a few months prior to that, I had a contract to acquire the city center. And so in that particular undertaking, Don and Frank Cass and others were involved. And when that transaction didn't go together, and we started another, and that concluded well. And so I talked to Don, who most of you that know Don know just what a prince of a person he is and how committed he is to this community. And he was so enthused that we marched forward on that, added Mike Schiff, who you know, tremendous personality, all types of energy, and we moved forward. I decided that the building had to be segmented, if you would, so that the full space, which is about 427,000 square feet, had a predictably productive use. And so the concept of having 3 uses, being a hotel, residences, and office, then came into fruition. So we, as I said, divided all of the floors into, condominium floors. And that allowed us that, what I'll call an accordion effect of letting true supply-demand control the use of the facility. So if residential were successful, we had the ability to go up or down. If office, same effect, and the hotel. So from that, we essentially made a decision that, in our opinion, collectively, the Marriott Hotel was the best flag to pursue. And this new autograph collection, which at the time was emerging, I think there were only 4 or 5 in the country at the time. It now has 117 of those units. And the Columbus location has been identified by the ratings as a 3rd out of 117. And I give that credit to Stephen Schwartz, who is the chairman of First Hospitality Group out of Chicago, Illinois, and our partner in that. We have a minority position in that. And we proceeded with our dialogue, and I'll just tell you how unusual certain events occur and bring about a tremendous result. Don Casta was at a fishing club in Castalia, Ohio, and as it turned out, Stephen Schwartz happened to be there as a guest of another member of that group. Don must have mentioned we just acquired a historic building and we're going to do a hotel and apartments and condominiums and office. And Stephen said, I'm in the hotel industry. So that the following week I was in Chicago meeting with Stephen, and that came together. We then really identified the next step, and that was who we considered to be the leading design management group on residential units, i.e. apartments and condominiums. And again, when you talk about how something evolves and develops and how important relationships are, Brett was actually my neighbor across the street. I can't tell you that we knew each other well, but we would say hello. But what impressed me the most, he had a swimming pool in his backyard. Never invited me over to swim, I might add. But he'd be he has 3.
I never invited him because every morning I would see Bob and he'd be running, and he was in way better shape than me, and I didn't want to sit at the pool next to him. So that's the real reason you were never invited.
But Brett has 3 just really nice sons, and he's out in front and he's passing the football and so on. So in talking with Don, I said, I'd really like to approach Brett because I just think I'd like to meet him, get to know him better, and I think that his profile is what we want to have. And that profile, and I'll try to stop harming your ears, that profile essentially was we really did. We wanted the best hotel, wanted the best restaurant, we wanted best coffee shop, which, as you know, is Starbucks, and on and on. So I met with Brett, and literally from the first moment we talked on both a personal and a professional level. I just knew Brett was the right person, and I'm just so thankful, Brett, that you agreed to participate with us and take the lead on the residences. So that's by way of background, and I don't want to extend the time, but if I might just say one thing, Kyle. Kyle, who's, as you know, very disciplined, so well organized, he called yesterday just to make sure that I had an understanding of what this gathering was. And I didn't, in the sense. When I learned it was televised and there would be such a tremendous group of leaders and community-spirited people, I thought, wow, I didn't realize this. He used the term, he said, well, some of the people here might perceive you as being a recluse and so on because they don't know you. And I think the term recluse, I asked if we might turn that to the term private, being a private person. But one of the reasons that I feel a little bit uncomfortable in speaking on behalf of this project is that it really is not about me, and it's not about one person. I just have the good fortune of having outstanding partners, meaning Brett and Stephen Schwartz, and particularly Don Casto and his partners, and Mike Schiff, and so on. I also have a tremendous group that I rely on probably more than I should, but I do it, and they always perform. And if you would indulge me for just a moment, I'd like just to have them stand and identify them quickly. Dan O'Hara is our asset manager that's been responsible for all of the coordination of the construction. And I knew that Dan was the right person. While he was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, essentially he was in New York and Manhattan responsible for all the Macy's stores, and brought to my attention that he was responsible for the only wooden escalator that serves some 30 stories. I thought, this is the person I need. And then jumping to Don Bush. Don has retired from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's been with me for 5 years. He's our CFO and has become really so knowledgeable, and he's been so critical to our handling of the historic tax credits, both federal and state. Don, would you just stand for a second? Right. And I know you all know Bob Loversage and Sam Rosenthal. They're just so critical. And would you both stand again? Because these are two people so invested. And also in that same category, John B. Hall, who I've worked with for more years than he would like me to probably say. And John, I call my aesthetic architect, but he's such a brand above that. And Keith Witt, who does our design work on our office layouts. And then Ed Alford, who actually is our general contractor under Marquee Construction for the Tower 10. And Val Usner, who is our office accounting person. Val, would you stand? Mm-hmm. And then Leah Smith, who is our tenant liaison, and she's the friendly voice you hear on the phone, and just such a nice lady. And lastly, my son Drew, who joined us a year and a half ago. He finished his doctorate at Michigan, so for 6 years there, he had to endure the harassment of being from Columbus. Now that he's here, he gets the harassment for being at the University of Michigan, but he brings all of the new ideas to the company. And lastly, I would just say, Park National Bank has worked with us from day one on this and has been a tremendous ally and has to be given credit. So a little longer than probably I should have said, but these are really the people that have made it all happen.
I think if there's one thing, Bob is private, but we have learned one thing about him today that does not fit in sync with a typical developer. He has humility. Brett, I didn't mean to go that fast to you on that note, but you're I think without question.
Great start, Kyle.
And by the way, I don't work out and I don't run, so I expect to beat your pool.
Okay, fine.
You're without question, I think, considered by everyone, probably the most progressive multifamily developer in Columbus. And you're invited to participate in the most traditional icon in the city. Was this a love at first sight situation where you knew you had to develop there? Was this something when you went back to the team and said, this is crazy, we shouldn't do this? What happened? Talk us through your thoughts.
Sure. So, you know, it's a little bit of all of that. The truth is that I started actually doing my own projects by doing renovations, not historic, iconic renovations, but kind of like a lot of people maybe got their start buying duplexes and renovating them and trying to figure out how you could take something old and really creatively make it relevant today. So I had a history of doing that, and it was something that I always got a lot of energy out of. We might be known for more progressive development, and the idea of a building, an iconic building, a historic building like LeVeque, might not really be what our group is known to do, so it might seem disconnected. But really what we have always been focused on is making an impact. And how can we impact the landscape? How can we impact the community? How can we impact the people that engage in our work every day? And there's no more impactful project as we heard from Nancy, in the city of Columbus than the LeVeque Tower. So as a product type, as an opportunity, it was something that we were immediately drawn to. I will say, just to kind of back up, you know, what you're right about Bob's humility, and the truth is that although the iconic nature of the opportunity was really exciting, meeting Bob and really hearing the story from him is what sold us. The humility that you've seen here, and by the way, that Bob really believes what he just said about the importance of the partnership. And there is truth to the collaborative nature of the partnership and how the shared passion, the shared vision really did ultimately help the end product. But he way underestimates the most important factor, which is his leadership, his vision, his ability to bring people together, to bring the team of people. I won't acknowledge our team, but our team saw that. Our team, has been incredible, a really critical part of this for us too. But the way that Bob has brought people together around the importance of this project, around the vision of the project, was something that we were probably drawn to more than anything else.
And Bob, on this project, what were the greatest challenges that you encountered, and how did you overcome them?
Elevators. Truly.
How are we overcoming that?
Elevators. But any building that has been allowed to diminish over decades is going to have surprises. And so we certainly encountered a fair share of those. But I would say that the logistics of this restoration, when you appreciate, for example, in the hotel industry itself, and Alfred, Mike Fitzpatrick is here, really performed so well. They essentially did the general contracting for First Hospitality Group, but the logistics on a hotel is much different than logistics on an office, or for that matter, apartments. The logistics on the apartments, both residential apartments and for lease and condominiums, again, materials and personnel, et cetera. We actually deferred a lot of the activities on the office part, and we're really just in the process of beginning that full restoration of the segment of space that we will commit to office. And just surely getting all of the materials and all of the people to keep something on a schedule that is fraught with surprises, and elevators that have
May I just
challenges.
add something about elevators? This particular building, early in my career, I worked for the Columbus Landmarks Foundation that had an office in one of the storefronts of the LeVeque Tower. And at that time, the city's development department was located in the LeVeque Tower. So I used the elevators a lot. And there was something about walking into that lobby and seeing health, happiness, and prosperity on bronze doors and elevators. So they may not function, but they sure are beautiful.
Well,
Brett, your biggest challenge, what did you encounter that you didn't expect?
Yeah, no, I think Bob really summarized it. One of the things that it was kind of interesting to hear some of that history, which I've heard, but I always enjoy hearing it, and the idea that there was a bankruptcy involved with the original development was something that was brought to my attention by many people. Most of my friends, in fact, said, like, what are you doing? There's been a lot of history there, and not all of it's been good. One of the things that we were really drawn to that got us comfortable with the challenges that were clearly going to be presented in a building like this was that Bob and his team, and I have to kind of second, his team, who's been really in this in a way beyond belief and beyond what anybody will ever know, had done a lot of the heavy lifting. They had really spent, I don't know how much time, but a lot of time getting the project to a point that we felt like when we would step in, a lot of the typical risks had already been mitigated. Still then, big challenges, the logistics for sure, having that many people, that many users, trying to use limited infrastructure, just the nature of being an urban building to begin with, and then that much activity all happening at once with deadlines for move-ins and openings, and certainly there's others, elevators being one we have fought, but it's a lot of the stuff that you would expect, and fortunately it's not been a whole lot more than that.
Interest is high and time is short. In a few minutes, we'll move to the audience questions. Those of you that have questions, I'd invite you to go to the microphone while that's taking place. One last question for really both of you. Given the opportunity to go back to square one on this project, is there anything you would change, and if so, what would it be?
The elevator construction schedule. And I say that with the utmost seriousness, and probably other than that, I'm not sure that we would do anything differently. I just think I personally feel so fortunate to have Brett with us, and Stephen Schwartz and his group, and the beauty. If you haven't been down to see the holiday decorations at the LeVeque and everything that's been done just within the last couple of weeks, I personally invite you, and if I'm there, I'd give you a tour.
Yeah, I would second that by and large. I think in hindsight, taking a really long-term view, we probably underestimated the potential of the empty nester market by a little. We kind of hedged and still went with a fairly typical unit mix for today's time, and that's worked really well. It's been really well received, but if I think about it, long term, I think the movement to have more of an empty nester urban experience, as you know, Kyle, has shifted in that time period. And long term, LeVeque, I think, could be a great home for that. But really, it's tough to even come up with anything. The experience has been phenomenally rewarding, no doubt challenging. There's been all that you would expect with a building like this, but I will just kind of conclude that comment by saying, with total sincerity, Bob has been so committed to making this a incredibly rewarding experience that whenever there was a challenge, the humility that he would come in with, the way that issues were addressed, was really unlike any project I've been involved with. And at the end of the day, it's really made it a very smooth and enjoyable process.
I think in the end, those of you that don't know Bob, and Bob's not going to spend a lot of time talking, go to the LeVeque if you've not been there yet. It is a point of pride for the city, nothing short, but a point of pride for the city once again. And it's because of the team, Bob and his team. So just a quick round of applause. It is a long-standing CM Street tradition to take audience questions. We ask everyone, again, a long-standing position. State your name, your question. No long editorials unless praising the skills of the moderator. Please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Todd Kleismith. I work at the Ohio History Connection, live in Clintonville. Just congratulations, of course, on the project. And one of the important tools in helping facilitate this work are the federal and state historic preservation tax credits. And I wondered if any of you could speak a little bit to the importance of that with the LeVeque project. Thank you.
Do you want to take it?
I will respond to that. I cannot overstate the importance of the federal and state historic tax credits. I would say categorically, we could not have done this project at the level of quality that we did, or perhaps even do it at all, without the anticipation and forecasting of those revenues. So, and as some of you may know, the federal historic tax credits have been challenged and they've been paring away. We were able to get those put back into the proposed Tax Reform Act. But I would just tell you that they are, as I said, I can't overstate the importance of them. And I think that probably the LeVeque Tower will be the best credit that one can apply to that.
Kathy?
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox. I'm with the Pizzuti Companies. It sounds like you've had a very successful partnership, and I'm curious what your next project together might be.
Well, Brett has grown so significantly. You know, I'm just a small part now, so I'd have to come to Brett with my hat in my hand. But I would love to do another project with him. I would indicate our focus primarily is office space and mixed use, and I would tell you categorically, in fact, we've spoken about it. Those mixed-use projects, we have one in Dublin we're looking at and one in Worthington we're looking at. Shared those both with Brett, and Brett would have the first opportunity on the residential side. So that would be my response.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have another property that's currently in planning, but we've spoken and would love to do something again.
Roger Blackwell, and I have mostly a curiosity question. When I first came to Columbus, I was told that prior to the Empire State Building, we were the tallest skyscraper in the world, and I've spread that rumor everywhere I can. And when I heard the timeline with the Empire today and the fact we were 6 inches higher than Washington Monument, it seems a very credible rumor. And so I was wondering, if it's true, can you verify that for us? And if it's not true, don't tell me, because I'd like to continue spreading it.
Oh, dear.
You know,
It does predate the Empire State Building. There were tall buildings in New York City. The Woolworth Building was one that was from 1916. It was referred to as the tallest building west of the Alleghenies. Does that help?
But that's good enough. Yes, thank you.
My name is Barbara Pratzner, and first of all, I have to say that I had an office on the 24th floor of the LeVeque some years ago, and the one and only time in my life I've ever been stuck in an elevator was in the LeVeque Tower between the 20th and 21st floor, so I echo the challenges. My question is for Nancy. As a longtime Columbus expert on historic preservation, what is your dream project that if you could put a dream team behind that we need in Columbus in terms of preservation, what would that dream project be?
Oh, my gosh. That is a really good one. I'm happy to say that Columbus has done a lot of my dream projects over the years. If you had asked me that question almost 40 years ago when I began in preservation, I would have said a lot of the buildings that are being preserved today. I think of it more as, right now, I think we have some challenges in some of our neighborhoods, and I think we have the potential. We have some great revitalized neighborhoods, but I think we need to spread it out a bit. So maybe some really critical, very creative thinking about how to tackle some of the neighborhoods that have been left behind. Because I think to be a truly great city, we've got a great downtown. We have the potential to do a lot in terms of both preservation and infill elsewhere. In terms of major buildings, we still have a few warehouse buildings. We've got buildings scattered around the city. But the iconic buildings, a lot of them are getting rehabilitated. I'm happy about that. I will say, I think we're going to move into mid-century architecture now. So one of those next skyscrapers that came along is what we used to call the City National Building, the Chase Building. But I think a lot of those buildings are going to need major investment. And we are looking at those now in a preservation context as being significant historic buildings. So there may be some opportunities along Broad Street with some of our mid-century modern buildings.
That Broad Street, from your experience, Bob, Brett, when we talk about adding square footage to our CBD along the Broad Street corridor, office absorption versus residential absorption, can you speak to the mix you'd see going into those buildings?
Well, it's probably not so much specific to Broad Street. I do think that it'll be interesting to see how buildings like the Chase Building, you see what Jeff Edwards is doing at the PNC Building. I think, there should be a real shift in that corridor that is probably a mix that, today is probably more residential. There does seem to be more of an opportunity in Columbus today for residential units than maybe there is a demand for the office product. But we tend to believe that there's a demand for good product. And so it's more about the quality, it's more about the thought, it's more about the design, it's more about, what does it mean to develop something, to renovate something? What are you trying to accomplish? What value are you creating? And there seems to be a fairly strong demand across the board for quality projects.
Nancy?
May I just quickly go back to Barbara's question? I thought of a building, Port Columbus, the original Port Columbus Airport is absolutely one of the most significant buildings we have in this city, nationally significant. Some very smart thinking ought to go into that project and the terminal, or the hangar that goes with it.
George?
Actually, Kyle, Nancy just answered the question.
I didn't even see you there, George.
2.5 years ago, Nancy was on the stage, and she said the original Columbus Airport terminal needed to be restored. And a group of guys, along with Sally Crane Cox, have created the fact that it has been preserved. It has a new roof on it, and thank you for the guidance that you've had in the past.
Another question, my prerogative, because I've got the microphone. Lessons learned by the two of you through this project.
Lessons learned. Definitely learned it's a little maybe redundant at this point, the value of partnership, really that every project is going to be challenging, and when you're in it with people that you really respect and that are going to handle the issue at hand respectfully. I saw Mike Schiff sneak in here. Bob mentioned him earlier. We've got a lot of really good people involved. And that partnership goes beyond the people that are actually invested in working on it, certainly Schooley, Brian Kent Jones. It goes to, I see, friends from the Downtown Commission, the credits, the abatements. These projects don't happen on their own. There's no one individual, there's no one, the countless amounts of people from a maintenance standpoint, from a construction standpoint, when those elevators goes down, there is an army of people that built this building to begin with and that brought it back, and I was just really reminded of the value of that collective effort.
Okay. Bob, any lessons?
I wouldn't say necessarily a lesson learned. I would say a lesson or lessons reinforced. And really, Brad touched on it, but I remember a mentor of mine in my early years of the practice indicated that because our firm at that time had done, I was the litigator, but in an area of real estate law was my specialty. And his comment was that a project is only as good as the quality and character of the people that are involved. And that's what I would say I take away, because I really do. I can't tell you how I respect the character of Brett, of Stephen, of the people on my team. And it's a truism that you, I think, should live your whole life with. So,
Thank you. Andy?
Yes, hi, Andy Campbell, Metropolitan Club. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'm really curious. We're seeing all kinds of development. We've never seen this before in Columbus. Lots happening, but I'm wondering each of your perspectives on what the city can do in regards to infrastructure, supporting that through parking, pedestrian access, rapid transit. Those things are really important to make all of this work. What are your thoughts?
May I go first? Transit, 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 transit. Look at the list for Amazon. I was clicking off absolutely everything. We've got a great urban area, cost of living, quality of life, universities, talent, an airport, mass transit. And we need to be thinking of next generation, not just working with what we have.
I would say that one thing, and this sounds a little bit contrary, and you'd think after I've done that 5 times that I've moved this away. But I would say this, while mass transit's a tremendously important part of the future, it's really going to be probably at least a decade or a decade and a half until we know whether or not that's fully received by the culture, by the economics of the community. So parking, if we're talking about the downtown area, and I think we all agree that a strong downtown is so critical to the growth of a community itself, that parking is something that's terribly crucial, at least in the short term. We happen to be involved with smart cities on a matter, and we think that's an important part of the future. But I think that there is going to be a 10, 15-year period where this parking is going to be critical. And why it's critical is you still have some buildings that are high-rise buildings in the downtown area, East Broad and Gay Street, others in the general area. We happen to be, our properties happen to be on the riverfront, the former Columbia Gas Building, the former Bicentennial Building, the parking garage there, and so on. So this is truly a leading area that will be secure for some time, but we're going to have other areas where building vacancy is going to rise. And over, if that time frame is correct, 15 years, those buildings, if they're not maintained, and they can't be if they're not occupied at a meaningful level. So what would help tremendously is additional parking. The city was extremely prudent, and I would give Michael Coleman the credit to this. You know, what we see downtown, and we all have a great deal of pride in, I think is because of his vision. And he had the vision and the support of council to build some public parking garages. What I think is important is if they take those have been very important. Now, they might be able to be sold and have a tremendous market value. They can put monies back in, do bonding, and put more parking around. Now, someone can say, well, in 15 years, if that's really an obsolete need, what do you do with those? Well, they can be designed in a way. You wouldn't design them where you have all floors, you know, on the angular design. They all be flat, so you can have those converted. So I would say parking is probably one of the most important things the city can do, and I understand that kind of pulls away from their belief that, you know, it's competitive with mass transit. We need to look at that time frame in which mass transit is going to be absorbed and accepted, and what's going to happen to some of these other buildings in the future.
Just quickly, I think that the city should be focused on projects that have impact, and that can be a wide range, including addressing affordability, but it could also include addressing anything that's going to help vibrancy, that's going to be creative, things are happening at such a fast pace. Technology, the world's evolving quickly. I'm not sure we really even know what the proper transit solution is. And by the time we think we have it, it's probably too late. I think we really need to focus on creativity, impact, and really looking to incentivize projects that are going to make a difference, not by location, not by class.
Thank you all. I'm Jane Scott with the Metropolitan Club. Kyle, great job. Everybody, great job. Thank you for helping put this together. You know, this is probably, what, the 6th or 7th Harrison Smith forum we've done?
10th.
Is it really?
They just go by really quickly.
Boy, I guess so. At any rate, it's always been our observation. We've had lots and lots of different developers, engineers, outside speakers, architects, you name it. And everybody seems to get along really well. I know you compete on a certain level, but it seems to be a real sense of collegiality among our folks in this community. Number one, is that as true, or am I Pollyanna? And does that happen in other communities, or are we truly unique and this is the Columbus way to do things?
I think it's true, by and large, and definitely more so than it is in other markets. I was a part of a group that went to Boston, a Columbus group sent by the Columbus Partnership, interacted with cities from all over the country, and nobody really could believe that this Columbus Way thing actually existed and was real. And it's been my experience, actually, you know, thinking about Harrison Smith, and humbled to have received that award today. I remember when I was in college and coming out of school and just getting started, his impact, he was known to be somebody that did that, to really would connect with young people, that would help make things happen, would bring people together. And as I look across this room, you know, Bob Weiler and so many mentors and friends and people that have just been so kind and generous that did not have to be, I think it's a very real thing, and it's really unique.
I would agree. I think that there is a camaraderie and a civility, if you would, among most developers and all of the groups that are really engaged in development. And I would hope that continues. I saw that, though, just by contrast, in the Bar Association when I first started practicing in 1973. Great deal of cordiality and helpfulness and mentorship and so on. I think we've all seen that change over the years, and still among many of the better firms, it still surfaces. But I would say it's something we really all have to work on, because it's so easy to let one's ego, so easy to let one's competitiveness, so easy to let one's vying for a similar project to suddenly become estranged. So my suggestion to everyone would be keep that in mind and work on that collegiality.
I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the back with, actually, in the hallway with cookies and coffee. And you can, of course, view and share today's forum on all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU, and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Smith & Hale, Crowe & Horwath, and the Robert Weiler Company. Thank you. And of course, our speakers, Nancy Recchie, Bob Meyers, Brett Kaufman, and Kyle Katz. Thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. See you next week.